My name is Chioma. I come from a small village in eastern Nigeria called Umudim, where life is simple but hard. The village of Umudim is surrounded by thick forests, rolling hills, and farmlands that stretch as far as the eye can see. My father was a proud farmer, and my mother traded cassava and palm oil in the market. I was the third of 6 children, and like most girls in the village, I dreamed of going to school and making a better life for my family. But dreams don't always come true. My father, a man of strict rules, believed the girl child was a burden. A woman is for marriage and children, he often said. So, at 14, while my brothers went to school, I stayed home to help my mother in the kitchen and on the farm. One day, my uncle from the city came to visit. Uncle Chuka was wealthy, always dressed in fine clothes, and wore heavy gold chains around his neck. My father respected him because he gave us money whenever he visited. That day, Uncle Chuka pulled my father aside, and I saw them whispering under the mango tree. I did not know what they were discussing, but when he left, my father told me, "Amora, your uncle wants you to help him in his shop in the city. You will leave tomorrow." I was excited. City life. Maybe I could finally learn something new and escape the hard farm work. I didn't know what awaited me. When we arrived in the city, I was overwhelmed. The buildings were taller than the Iroko trees back home, and the streets were always busy with people shouting and horns blaring. Uncle Chuka's house was big, much bigger than our mud hut in the village. I thought I had entered paradise. But that night, things changed. Uncle Chuka called me into his room. "You will work for me, Amora," he said, his voice low and strange. "But you must learn how to make men happy. That is the only way you will survive in this house." I did not understand. Make men happy? I asked, confused. He slapped me hard across the face. "Don't ask questions. Tomorrow, you will learn." And so it began. Uncle Chuka brought men to the house, strangers who gave him money. He would send me to his room, telling me to do whatever the men wanted. At first, I cried. I begged them to stop. But my uncle would beat me and lock me up without food. "You are mine now," he would say. "Your father gave you to me." Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months. I lost count of how many men came. I became empty, like a walking shadow. My uncle told me, "You are feeding your family. If you run, your parents will die of shame." I thought of my father and my mother, still in the village, unaware of what I was going through. I hated them for sending me here, but I hated myself even more for not being strong enough to run. I was trapped, a prisoner in my uncle's house. One day, I fell very sick. I could not move. My uncle panicked and called a nurse. The woman, who saw the bruises on my body and my weak state, asked me quietly, "What is happening here?" I was afraid to speak, but her eyes were kind. For the first time, I told someone my story. That woman helped me escape. She took me to a church, where the pastor and his wife sheltered me. They spoke to the police, and my uncle was arrested. When I finally returned to my father's house, I was not the same Amora who had left. My father looked at me with shame in his eyes, but I spoke up. "You sold me," I told him. "You sent me to hell." My mother cried and held me, but it was too late. The damage had already been done. For months, I did not leave the house. The villagers whispered when they saw me, calling me names like spoiled and useless. My father ignored me most of the time, ashamed of what he had done but too proud to admit it. My younger siblings stared at me with pity, as though I was a ghost in my own home. I thought about ending my life many times, but something inside me refused to give up. Then one day, Mama Ngozi, a woman known for helping troubled girls, came to our house. She had heard my story through the pastor who had helped me escape. "Chioma, you are not finished," she said. Your pain does not define you. Come with me. I left Umudim that day with her, not knowing where we were going, but knowing I could not stay where I was. Mom and Ngozi ran a center in the nearby town where girls like me were given shelter, counseling, and a chance to learn. I met other girls who had been through worse than I had, yet they smiled and held my hand. They became my sisters. With Mom and Ngozi's help, I went back to school. It was not easy. I was older than most of my classmates and still carried my shame like a heavy sack. But I studied hard. Books became my escape, my hope, my future. Years later, I graduated, and I promised to fight for girls like me. Today, I work with organizations that rescue girls trapped in abuse and exploitation. I travel to villages like Umudim, speaking to parents about the importance of valuing and protecting their daughters. I tell my story, not because it is easy, but because it must be told. When I think of Uncle Chuka and my father, I no longer feel anger. I feel pity. Pity for a world that refuses to see a girl's worth. But I also feel hope. Hope that change is possible. I am sharing this story because there are many girls like me, girls who are used as tools, even by their own families. I want the world to know that a girl is not a burden. A girl is not an object. A girl is a human being with dreams and hopes. I survived. And now, I fight for others like me.